Rosethorn Global's annual shareholder meeting began on the top floor of its Manhattan tower, inside a glass conference hall built to impress. The city stretched below, like a prize Kellen Rosethorn believed he had earned. Board members filled the long table. Investors sat with quiet confidence. Senior executives held folders marked with the Rosethorn crest. Business reporters waited near the back, ready to turn Kellen's words into headlines by evening. Kellen stood at the front in a dark tailored suit, speaking with calm authority. Behind him, profit charts glowed across the screen. Every number told the same story. Rosethorn Global was stronger, richer, and more respected than it had been in years. People admired him, they trusted him, some even feared him. But halfway down the table sat Maria Rosethorn, his wife, the woman who had stood beside him before the applause, before the praise, before the world called him brilliant. She wore a cream suit. Her posture stayed steady. Her hands rested on the table, except one detail was missing. Her wedding ring was not on her finger. Kellen had noticed it the moment she entered. His smile did not change, but his jaw tightened. Near the executive staff, Alara Wren stood in silence with a blue folder held at her side. No one paid her much attention. That was their first mistake. Kellen closed the presentation folder with slow precision. The room expected another business update, maybe a final statement about growth, maybe a smooth transition into the foundation vote. Instead, Kellen stepped away from the podium. His eyes moved across the board members, the investors, the reporters, the executives, until they landed on Maria. She did not look away. That seemed to irritate him. He wanted fear. He wanted confusion. He wanted the first crack to show before he delivered the blow. Kellen straightened his cufflinks and said, "There is one personal matter I need to address before this board votes on restructuring our charitable operations." A few reporters lifted their heads. One board member stopped writing. Maria remained still. Kellen's voice grew colder. "My marriage has been under strain for some time," he said. "I will no longer hide the truth." The room tightened with silence. Kellen turned slightly toward Alara, wearing the faint smile of a man who believed the ending had already been arranged. "I'm leaving my wife for my secretary."
I'm leaving my wife for my secretary.
Gasps filled the glass hall. Pens froze, cameras shifted, every face turned toward Maria, waiting for shame to bend her head. Kellen watched her closely, expecting tears, panic, or a broken question, but Maria gave him none of it. She sat with her back straight, her face calm, and her bare hand resting on the table. For the first time that morning, Kellen looked less certain. Maria did not cry. She did not cover her mouth. She did not whisper his name like a woman begging for mercy. That was what shocked the room most. Kellen had chosen the annual shareholder meeting for a reason. He wanted witnesses. He wanted cameras. He wanted investors to see him as honest and bold. Most of all, he wanted Maria to look wounded enough for the board to question her strength. But Maria gave him silence. Not weak silence, controlled silence. Her eyes stayed on him with a calmness that made his confidence shrink. She looked like a woman who had already mourned him in private and arrived only to watch him reveal himself in public. A reporter near the back slowly lowered his pen. Adeline Morrow, the board chairwoman, leaned forward with a slight frown. Two executives exchanged nervous looks. Kellen waited for Maria to speak first. He expected anger. He expected a trembling voice. He expected one emotional sentence he could use against her later. She gave him nothing. Instead, she looked across the room at Alara Wren. For a brief second, their eyes met. No one else understood the meaning of that look. Kellen mistook it for shock. The board mistook it for pain. The reporters mistook it for the first sign of a scandal. Only Maria and Alara knew the truth. This was not the moment Kellen would destroy Maria. This was the moment he had walked into her evidence. Kellen turned toward Alara with a slow smile. He expected her to step forward. He expected her to stand beside him like proof of the story he had built. For months he had allowed the company to whisper. Closed-door meetings, late emails, private dinners, public praise that sounded innocent to strangers but sharp enough to wound his wife. Now, in front of the board, investors, reporters, and staff, He believed Alara would complete the humiliation. "Alara," he said softly, as if inviting her into the future. The room watched her. Alara did move, but she did not walk toward Kellen. She walked past him. The smile left his face. Every step she took made the silence heavier. Her black suit was neat. Her expression stayed calm. The blue folder rested in her hand like something small enough to ignore, yet strong enough to change everything. Mireya did not rise. She only turned slightly as Alara reached her chair. Alara placed the folder on the boardroom table. The sound was quiet, but it struck the room harder than Kellen's announcement. She rested one hand on the back of Mireya's seat, not as an employee asking permission, but as a woman choosing truth. Kellen's voice dropped. "What are you doing?" Alara looked at him. "I was never your secret," she said. "I was her witness." The room changed after Alara spoke. Not loudly, not at once, but enough for Kellen to feel the power slip from his hands. Adeline Marrow reached for the blue folder. The legal advisor beside her leaned closer. A reporter near the back lifted his phone, no longer taking notes, but recording every breath in the room. Kellen's face hardened. "This is private company strategy," he said. Mireya finally stood. Every eye moved to her. She did not raise her voice. She did not fight for attention. She already had it. "No, Kellen," she said. "This is my life's work." The folder held emails, meeting notes, calendar changes, and proof that Kellen had used Alara's name to damage Mireya's image. He wanted the board to see his wife as too emotional to lead the foundation she built, but the secretary was never his lover. She was Mireya's witness. So before this story begins, welcome to Love Tales with Mr. Easton. If you enjoy emotional stories about love, betrayal, dignity, and second chances, like this video, share it, comment your thoughts, and subscribe. Because this was never a simple marriage scandal. It was a public trap. And Kellen Rosethorn had no idea his wife had already learned how to survive him. Long before the Rosethorn name followed Mireya into boardrooms, charity dinners, and newspaper columns, she was a girl from Savannah who knew how to stand tall without needing anyone to notice. Her childhood did not have marble floors, private drivers, or family portraits in business magazines. It had warm mornings, clean uniforms, folded church clothes, handwritten grocery lists, and a small home filled with lessons no money could buy. In that house, love was shown through effort. If something broke, someone fixed it. If someone cried, someone listened. If a neighbor needed help, Mireya's family found a way to show up. She grew up on streets where people greeted one another by name. Older women corrected children they did not give birth to. Men helped carry heavy bags without being asked. Families did not always have enough, but many still shared what little they had. Mireya noticed those things early. She noticed how pride could keep people silent when they needed support. She noticed how one unpaid bill could change the mood inside a home. She noticed how a kind word, given at the right moment, could help someone breathe again. Those early years shaped her more than wealth ever would. Mireya learned how to observe people. She learned when a smile was real and when it covered worry. She learned to hear the pain inside silence. While other children dreamed only of beautiful clothes and large houses, Mireya dreamed of building places where people felt safe enough to ask for help. She did not know the name Rosethorn yet. She did not know Kellen existed. She only knew one truth. A person's worth should never depend on how much money stood beside their name. Mireya's mother taught music at a small community school where the piano was often out of tune, but her patience never was. She believed music gave children something firm to hold when life felt uncertain. Every afternoon, she sat with students who struggled to read notes, students who came hungry, students who carried sadness too heavy for their age. She never rushed them. She never made them feel slow. She would tap the rhythm gently and say, "Start again. Starting again is still progress." Mireya watched that patience become a kind of power. Her father worked with his hands. He repaired homes, doors, roofs, cabinets, fences, and whatever else people trusted him to fix. He was not the loudest man in any room, but people respected him because his word stayed solid. If he promised to arrive by sunrise, His truck was outside before the first light touched the road. If a family could not pay in full, he found a fair way forward without shaming them. From him, Mireya learned that dignity did not need an audience. He often came home tired, with dust on his boots and small cuts across his knuckles, but he never entered the house angry at the people waiting for him. He would wash his hands, kiss his wife's forehead, and ask Mireya what she learned that day. Her mother gave her tenderness, her father gave her steadiness. Together, they taught her that strength was not noise. Strength was consistency. Strength was doing the right thing when no one clapped. Strength was protecting people without making them feel weak. Years later, when Kellen Rosethorn mistook her quiet nature for surrender, he failed to understand where she came from. Mireya had been raised by people who made softness strong. Mireya learned early that kindness without discipline could be used against you. Her mother was gentle, but never foolish. Her father was generous, but never without boundaries. Their home taught balance. Help people, but do not let them empty you. Listen with love, but do not surrender your voice. Forgive when your heart is ready, but never pretend harm did not happen just to keep peace. Those lessons followed Mireya everywhere. At school, she was the girl who helped classmates study without making them feel embarrassed. When someone sat alone, she noticed. When a teacher looked tired, she offered to collect papers. She was not perfect. She had moments of doubt, frustration, and fear like anyone else, but she carried a rare awareness. She understood that people often carried private burdens into public spaces. That awareness made her different. She did not admire wealth the way others did. She saw money as a tool, not a throne. In Savannah, she had seen families with little still carry honor. She had also seen people with influence treat others like stepping stones. So she promised herself that if she ever stood close to power, she would not worship it. She would challenge it. She would make it serve people who had been ignored. As she grew older, Mireya began writing ideas in notebooks, community programs, youth support plans, housing assistance models, therapy access for children, small grants for mothers trying to rebuild. She did not have money to fund those dreams, but she had vision. Her classmates talked about marrying rich. Mireya talked about building something that lasted. That was what made her dangerous to a man like Kellen later. She could love deeply, but she would never believe his wealth made him greater than her conscience. When Mireya left Savannah for New York, she did not leave because she hated where she came from. She left because her dreams had outgrown the rooms available to her. Her parents stood with her at the bus station before the first part of the journey. Her mother tucked a small music charm into her palm. Her father checked her bags twice, even though both suitcases had already been zipped and weighed. He tried to look calm, but Mireya saw the worry in his eyes. New York was not gentle to newcomers. It was expensive, crowded, impatient, and proud. It rewarded confidence, but it rarely paused for people still finding their way. Mireya arrived with 2 suitcases, modest savings, and a notebook filled with plans most people would have called too ambitious. The first months tested her. She lived in a small rented room where the heater argued with winter and the window stuck during summer. She stretched meals. She walked when subway fare felt too precious. She took temporary work, answered phones, filed documents, helped at events, and learned how rich people spoke when they thought service workers were invisible. Some were kind, some were careless, some smiled with empty warmth. Mireya listened to all of them. At night, she opened her notebook and wrote more ideas. She studied nonprofit reports. She attended free public lectures. She volunteered when her schedule allowed it. She learned how foundations worked, how donors thought, and how families often got lost inside systems meant to help them. Each hard day sharpened her purpose. She was not in New York to become someone else. She was there to become the fullest version of the girl from Savannah who believed help should arrive before hope died. Mireya's first steady position in charity planning did not look impressive from the outside. The office sat on a middle floor of an older building where the elevator doors opened with a tired sound, and the reception desk always had too many files stacked behind it. The team handled donor events, benefit dinners, emergency campaigns, and partnership meetings for organizations that needed money but often lacked access to wealthy circles. Mireya started with basic tasks. She confirmed guest lists, she called vendors, she arranged seating charts, she prepared donor packets, she proofread letters, she stayed late when last-minute changes threatened to ruin weeks of planning. No task felt beneath her because every detail had a person attached to it. A misplaced donor letter could delay funding. A poorly planned event could cost a shelter its winter supplies. A careless sentence could make a grieving family feel used instead of supported. Mireya understood the human cost of small mistakes. Over time, senior planners noticed her gift. She could read a room before the meeting began. She knew when a donor felt ignored, when a director felt desperate, when a family representative felt nervous, and when a wealthy guest wanted praise more than truth. She had a calm way of asking questions that made people reveal what they truly feared. That skill became her strength. She learned that money could open doors, but ego often stood in the doorway. She learned that power loved control, but trust required humility. She learned that wealthy people donated for many reasons, some noble, some personal, some tied to image. Mireya never judged too quickly. She simply paid attention. That attention prepared her for the evening Kellen Rosethorn walked into the office with panic hidden beneath a perfect suit. The crisis arrived near the end of a long workday. Most of the staff had already packed their bags when voices rose from the conference room. A major donor connected to a Rosethorn global charity project had threatened to withdraw support. The project depended on that funding. Families were waiting. Public promises had already been made. If the donor walked away, the damage would reach far beyond one failed event. Kellen Rosethorn entered the office with 3 advisors, 2 legal consultants, and the kind of controlled expression men use when they refuse to admit they are close to losing. He was younger than Mireya expected, sharper too. His suit spoke of wealth, but his eyes carried exhaustion. His advisors talked over one another. One suggested a stronger legal response, another wanted a public statement, a third blamed the donors team. Kellen stood near the window, silent, his jaw tight, his patience thinning by the second. Mireya had no title large enough to command that room. So she listened. For 10 minutes, no one asked why the donor was angry. They focused on protecting Rosethorn Global, defending the contract, and controlling the public message. Mireya heard fear beneath the noise, not from Kellen, from the donor. At last, she spoke. Has anyone asked what fear is behind the anger? The room went quiet. Kellen turned toward her for the first time. Mireya explained that donors rarely withdraw support over one mistake alone. They leave when they feel ignored, embarrassed, or used. She advised him to stop defending the company and start addressing the wound. Kellen followed her advice. The donor stayed. That night, he waited outside her office, no longer looking like a billionaire in command, but like a man who had finally met someone who understood the truth beneath power. Kellen Rosethorn was not always the untouchable billionaire the world later praised. Before the tailored interviews, before the magazine covers, before investors smiled whenever his name appeared on a report, Kellen stood inside Rosethorn Global as a young heir surrounded by doubt. The company carried his family name, but at that time, the name felt less like a crown and more like a weight pressing against his chest. Rosethorn Global had offices filled with expensive furniture, polished, floors and executives who knew how to smile while hiding fear. Outside the building, people still believed the company was strong. Inside, the truth looked different. Contracts had slowed, donors were losing trust, old partners wanted distance. Board members spoke carefully when Kellen entered the room, but their eyes always said more than their mouths. They did not believe he was ready. Some thought he was too young. Some thought he was too emotional. Some thought he had inherited a company already damaged beyond repair. Kellen heard the whispers even when no one spoke them directly. He saw the side conversations stop whenever he walked into a hallway. He noticed how senior executives asked him simple questions in a tone that felt like a test. Every meeting felt like a courtroom where he had to prove he deserved the chair his father left behind. At night, when the office emptied, Kellen stayed behind with financial reports spread across his desk. He read the same numbers again and again, searching for a way forward. No matter how calm he appeared in public, pressure followed him everywhere. He was rich, but not free. He had power, but no peace. He had a last name everyone recognized, but he had not yet earned the trust that came with it. That was the version of Kellen Maria met first. Kellen's father had built Rosethorn Global with ambition, pride, and a cold kind of charm that made people follow him until the cost became too high. To the public, the older Rosethorn had been a business legend. He appeared at charity galas, shook hands with mayors, and spoke about legacy as if the word belonged to him. But inside the company, his leadership left scars. He made promises too quickly. He ignored warnings. He chased expansion without protecting the people who had to carry the risk after him. By the time Kellen took control, he did not inherit a clean empire. He inherited debt hidden behind confident press releases. He inherited broken partnerships. He inherited donors who felt used, employees who felt ignored, and board members who wanted the Rosethorn name without Rosethorn leadership. That was the cruelest part. The same people who praised his father in public now used his father's mistakes as a reason to corner Kellen in private. Every board meeting tested him. Every report carried another problem. Every conversation ended with a reminder that one wrong move might cost him the company. Corvin Say, one of the board's most strategic advisors, watched him with a smile that never reached his eyes. Corvin offered guidance, but his words often felt like traps wrapped in politeness. Kellen knew many people were waiting for him to fail. He also knew anger would prove them right. So he learned control. He controlled his voice. He controlled his face. He controlled the way his hands stayed still when someone challenged him. But the more he controlled himself, the less human he seemed. People mistook his silence for arrogance, but most of the time, it was fear. He feared becoming his father. He feared being weaker than his father. Most of all, he feared that both might be true. The crisis that brought Kellen into Maria's world began with one phone call. A major donor connected to a joint charity project had threatened to withdraw support. The project was more than a public event. It funded housing assistance, child support services, and emergency relief for families already promised help. If the donor walked away, Rosethorn Global would lose more than money. It would lose trust in a space where trust had already grown thin. Kellen arrived at the charity planning office with his legal team and advisors moving around him like a shield. The meeting room filled quickly. Voices overlapped, papers shifted across the table. One lawyer insisted the donor had no clean exit under the agreement. Another advisor pushed for a public response that would make Rosethorn Global look steady. Someone else suggested offering a larger naming benefit to calm the donor's anger. None of it worked. The donor's representative remained firm. The issue was not the size of the check or the placement of a name on a wall. Something had broken deeper than that, but no one in the room slowed down long enough to ask what it was. Kellen stood near the window, one hand in his pocket, his jaw tight. He looked composed to anyone who did not know how fear hides inside stillness. But Maria noticed. She had been seated near the side wall, taking notes for the planning team, quiet enough that most of the powerful people in the room forgot she was there. She watched Kellen's advisors fight the surface of the problem. She watched Kellen grow colder with each failed solution. Everyone kept trying to protect the company. No one tried to understand the wound. That was when Maria stopped writing. Maria did not interrupt with force. She waited for the room to run out of noise. The lawyers had argued their points. The advisors had offered their polished phrases. Kellen had heard enough to know none of them had reached the heart of the problem. The donor's representative sat with folded hands, polite but distant, like someone who had already chosen the door. Maria lifted her eyes from her notes. Has anyone asked what fear is hiding behind the donor's anger? The room fell quiet. Not because she spoke loudly. She did not. It was quiet because her question cut through every polished answer that had failed before it. Kellen turned toward her. For the first time since entering the office, he truly looked at the young woman seated away from the center of the table. She was not dressed like his executives. She did not carry herself like someone hungry for attention, but her eyes were steady, and her voice held the calm of someone who had been listening while everyone else performed certainty. Maria explained that donors rarely leave because of one mistake alone. They leave when they feel ignored, embarrassed, or treated like a wallet instead of a partner. She said the donor's anger sounded less like greed and more like fear that Rosethorn Global had used the charity project to repair its image without respecting the families involved. The words struck the room. One advisor shifted uncomfortably. A lawyer looked down at the agreement as if it might protect him from the truth. Kellen said nothing. Mireya continued with care. She told him to stop defending the company for 5 minutes and ask what trust had been damaged, not what rule had been broken, not what clause applied. Trust. For Kellen, that word landed harder than any accusation. Kellen could have dismissed her. No one in the room would have blamed him. Mireya was not the highest-ranking person there. She did not carry a famous last name. She had no title that forced a billionaire CEO to listen. But something in her tone held him still. She had not tried to embarrass him. She had not attacked his company. She had not spoken to impress the board or win favor with the donors team. She had simply named the truth everyone else had missed. So Kellen followed her advice. He asked the donor's representative what concern had been left unheard. The answer came slowly at first, but it came. The donor felt the project had shifted away from families and toward corporate repair. Their name was being tied to promises they feared Rosethorn Global would not honor. They worried the children and parents in the program would become props in a redemption story for a company still trying to escape its founders' mistakes. For once, Kellen did not defend. He listened. Mireya watched him carefully. His shoulders eased by a fraction. His face remained serious, but the sharpness left his eyes. He apologized without hiding behind legal language. He promised direct reporting, stronger family protection measures, and a donor oversight role that would keep the project honest. The room changed. The donor's representative no longer looked ready to leave. The lawyers stopped pushing papers forward. The advisors stopped speaking over one another. For the first time that evening, the meeting moved toward repair instead of control. By the end, the donor stayed. The project survived. Families who never knew Kellen's name and had never met Mireya kept the support they had been promised. Kellen should have felt relief only. Instead, he felt something far more unsettling. Respect. That night, Mireya stayed late to gather the remaining files. The office had emptied into a softer quiet. Chairs were tucked in. Coffee cups had been cleared. The long tension of the crisis had faded, leaving only scattered notes, tired lamps, and the faint hum of the city outside. Mireya placed the donor packet back into its folder and reached for her coat. When she stepped into the hallway, Kellen Rosethorn was waiting near the elevator. He no longer looked like the man who had entered with advisors surrounding him. Without the room watching, some of his armor had slipped. His tie was loosened. His expression was thoughtful. The controlled distance in his eyes had given way to something more honest. "You saved me in there," he said. Mireya paused. "No," she answered gently. "I reminded you to listen." The words were simple, but they stayed with him. Most people around Kellen either feared his power, wanted access to it, or tried to shape it for their own benefit. Mireya had done none of those things. She had spoken to the part of him that still wanted to do right, even when pride and pressure nearly buried it. He studied her for a moment, as if trying to understand why her correction did not feel like an insult. "What made you see it?" he asked. Mireya held the folder against her chest. "People tell the truth in the way they protect themselves. That donor was not trying to win. He was trying not to be used." Kellen lowered his eyes. For years he had been surrounded by experts, but few people had ever looked beyond his title. Mireya had. She had seen the fear in the room, including his. That was the beginning of his fascination with her, not because she praised him, because she understood him. After the donor crisis, Kellen Rosethorn found himself thinking about Mireya more than he wanted to admit. At first, he told himself it was professional. She had a sharp mind. She understood people. She could hear the truth inside a room before others even noticed tension. A company like Rosethorn Global needed that kind of insight, especially while old partners still questioned his leadership. So he began asking for her opinion. A speech draft would arrive at her desk with a short note from him. "Tell me where it sounds false." A charity proposal would appear in her inbox. Would families trust this wording? A donor response would come with one question. Does this sound honest or defensive? Mireya never gave him empty praise. If his words sounded proud, she said so. If a message felt cold, she marked the line and wrote, "This protects your image, not the people." If he missed the human side of a decision, she brought his attention back to it. Kellen should have disliked that. Most people softened their truth around him. They dressed correction in flattery. They spoke as if his money needed protection from honesty. Mireya did not. She respected his position, but she never bowed to it. That unsettled him at first. Later, it became the reason he wanted her near every important conversation. Soon, his team noticed her name appearing more often. Mireya was invited to planning calls. She reviewed campaign language. She sat in meetings where her title seemed too small for the weight of her voice. Kellen began trusting her judgment before he understood he was trusting her heart, and each time she corrected him without fear, he felt less like a billionaire being managed and more like a man being seen. Their connection did not grow through grand gestures. It grew in ordinary moments that slowly became impossible for either of them to ignore. Kellen started leaving coffee on Mireya's desk when meetings ran late. The first time, he forgot sugar. The second time, he brought the wrong tea. By the third time, he had learned exactly how she liked it: warm, light, and never too sweet. Mireya teased him about it. "You manage billion-dollar deals, but tea nearly defeated you." Kellen looked down at the cup, pretending to study it like a contract. "I am improving under pressure," she laughed before she could stop herself. That laugh stayed with him for the rest of the day. Late nights became common. When an event plan shifted, Mireya stayed to fix the details. When a donor meeting ran too long, Kellen waited until she packed her bag. He began walking her out, claiming it was too late for her to leave alone. Mireya told him she had survived New York before he discovered concern. Still, she slowed her steps. They talked during those walks, not about stock prices or board pressure at first. Small things came first: her mother's music lessons, his poor eating habits, the way he never noticed when his tie was crooked after long meetings, the old book she carried in her bag because it reminded her of home. Kellen listened more than he spoke. That surprised Mireya. The world saw him as forceful, but with her, in those short walks between work and waiting cars, he became quieter, less polished, less guarded. Sometimes he said something dry enough to make her smile. Sometimes she challenged him in a way no one else dared. The more time they spent together, the less their bond felt accidental. Mireya began to understand that Kellen's confidence had been built for survival. In public, he stood straight, spoke clearly, and let nothing shake his voice. He knew how to enter a room and take command before anyone questioned him. He knew how to hold silence until other people became uncomfortable enough to reveal too much. To most people, he looked powerful. To Mireya, he looked tired. She noticed the moments others missed. After a tense meeting, when everyone else celebrated a small win, Kellen would stare at the screen for one extra second, as if calculating the next threat before the current one had ended. When older board members praised him, he accepted it with a polite nod, but his eyes never warmed. When someone mentioned his father, even with admiration, his entire face grew still. Mireya saw pain there. Not obvious pain, contained pain. The kind a man hides because he believes being wounded gives others permission to strike harder. One evening, she found him alone in a conference room after a donor dinner. The plates had been cleared. The guests were gone. Kellen stood near the window with one hand against the glass, looking out without truly seeing the city. "You did well tonight," she said. He gave a small smile. "That sounds like something people say when they know you barely survived." Mireya stepped closer, not enough to crowd him, only enough to make her presence known. "You do not always have to survive rooms alone," she said. He turned toward her. For once, he had no polished answer. That was when Mireya realized his greatest fear was not failure. It was needing someone and being punished for it. The night everything shifted between them began with a boardroom loss Kellen had not expected. He had fought for a restructuring plan that would protect the company from old debts and rebuild trust with partners who had nearly walked away. He had prepared for weeks. Every figure was strong, every legal point had been checked, every risk had been measured. Still, the board voted against him. Corvin Say did not attack openly. He did something worse. He praised Kellen's effort, spoke about caution, questioned timing, and guided enough members away from the proposal to defeat it by a narrow margin. Kellen accepted the result without raising his voice. He thanked the board. He shook hands. He walked out like a man untouched by disappointment. Mireya knew better. Later that night, she found him in his office. Rain tapped against the windows. The city lights blurred beyond the glass. His jacket lay over a chair. His tie hung loose. The reports from the failed vote remained open on his desk, untouched since the meeting ended. He did not look up when she entered. "You should go home," he said. "So should you. I'm not good company tonight. I did not come for entertainment." That made him look at her. Mireya placed a cup of tea on his desk. She did not ask too many questions. She did not try to cheer him with false hope. She stood there with steady compassion, letting him keep his pride while giving him room to put down the weight. At last, she said, "You do not have to perform strength for me." Kellen's face changed. Not much. Only enough for Mireya to see that her words had reached the part of him no boardroom ever touched. Kellen sank into the chair behind his desk, as if the room had finally become safe enough for honesty. For a while, he said nothing. Mireya sat across from him, both hands wrapped around her own cup of tea. She did not rush him. She had learned long ago that some truths came out slowly, because people had spent years locking them away. "My father loved the company more than anything," Kellen said at last. Mireya listened. "He called it legacy. I used to think legacy meant something noble." His mouth tightened. "Now I think it was the word he used when he wanted people to forgive his ambition." The sentence seemed to cost him. He told her about growing up in rooms where affection depended on performance. Good grades earned approval. Public mistakes earned cold silence. Weakness was treated like a stain. His father taught him that respect had to be taken before anyone else claimed it. Kellen had spent years trying not to become him, yet every board fight pushed him closer to that same hardness. Every insult made control feel safer. Every betrayal made tenderness feel foolish. "I carry his name," he said quietly. "Some days it feels like a debt I never agreed to pay." Mireya's eyes softened. "You are not your father," she said. "You sound sure. I'm not saying you are free from his shadow. I'm saying you still get to choose what kind of man stands in the light." Kellen looked at her for a long time. No one had ever spoken to him like that, not with fear, not with hunger, with belief. And for the first time in years, belief felt more powerful than applause. Months passed before Kellen asked Mireya to meet him near the water at sunrise. He did not tell her why. He only said there was something he wanted to say before the city became loud. Mireya arrived wearing a simple coat, her hair moving softly in the early morning air. The sky was pale, and the river held the first glow of day. Kellen stood waiting without cameras, without staff, without a driver close enough to hear them. For once, nothing about the moment felt arranged for public admiration. He looked nervous. That touched her more than any display of wealth ever could. "I have spent most of my life trying to become impossible to hurt," he said. Mireya stayed quiet. "You saw through that before I was ready. You challenged me without making me feel small. You listened when I had no right to expect comfort. You reminded me that strength without kindness turns into another kind of damage." His voice lowered. "I do not know how to be gentle with my own heart yet, Mireya, but I want to learn with you." He opened a small box. The ring inside was beautiful, but Mireya barely saw it at first. She was looking at his face, at the fear and hope he no longer tried to hide. "Kellen," she whispered, "I'm not asking you to stand beside a perfect man," he said. "I'm asking if you will stand beside a man willing to grow." Mireya thought of the donor crisis, the late walks, the rainy office, and the wounded honesty beneath his pride. She placed her hand in his. "Yes," she said. And in that quiet morning, before the world knew their love story, Mireya believed him. Rosethorn Global did not recover in one grand moment. It recovered through pressure, sleepless nights, difficult meetings, repaired partnerships, and decisions that demanded more from Kellen than he thought he had left. For months after his proposal to Mireya, he worked with a hunger that seemed noble at first. He wanted to prove the company could survive. He wanted to prove his father's mistakes would not bury him. Most of all, he wanted to prove that the Rosethorn name could stand for something better. Mireia stood beside him through that climb. She reviewed speeches before investor conferences. She softened statements that sounded too proud. She reminded him when a company decision needed more humanity. She helped donors trust him again, not by decorating his image, but by pushing him toward honesty when pride tempted him toward control. Slowly, the numbers changed. Old partners returned with cautious interest. New investors arrived with careful questions. The company paid down major debts. Projects that once looked impossible began to move forward. Rosethorn Global shifted from a wounded corporation into a name people discussed with renewed respect. Kellen became the face of that revival. At first, he shared the victory with Mireia. In private, he would press a tired kiss to her forehead and say, "We made it through another day." She believed those words. She believed he understood that success had not been his alone, but success has a quiet way of testing the heart. The more Rosethorn Global rose, the more the world looked at Kellen as if he had saved everything by himself. Applause followed him into rooms. Praise waited for him at every event. Mireia watched the man she loved begin to stand taller. At first, she felt proud. Later, she felt him drifting. Investors who had once questioned Kellen's leadership began speaking his name with admiration. They called him disciplined, sharp, visionary. They praised his ability to take a damaged company and turn it into a stronger empire. Men who used to challenge him during board meetings now laughed at his smallest comments. Women who once treated Mireia like the useful wife of a troubled heir began asking her how it felt to be married to one of the most respected CEOs in the country. Magazines called Kellen the man who restored a dynasty. Business reporters described his leadership as fearless. Financial panels debated his next acquisition. Industry dinners placed him at the center table. Photographers waited for him at entrances. Board members who once spoke to him like a risk now spoke to him like a prize. Kellen absorbed it all. At first, Mireia thought the attention would heal the part of him that had spent years feeling judged. She hoped public respect would make him softer in private, less haunted by the fear of failure. But praise did not quiet him. It fed the hunger he had hidden. He began speaking in sharper terms. He liked being introduced as the man who saved Rosethorn Global. He liked watching people wait for his opinion. He liked how quickly a room adjusted when he stepped inside. The board noticed. So did Mireia. The man who once valued her honest corrections started accepting only the comments that made him feel larger. When she marked a speech and warned that a line sounded too self-congratulatory, he smiled without warmth. "You worry too much," he said. That sentence stayed with her. It was the first time he made her care sound like weakness. It would not be the last. The first missed dinner came with an apology. Kellen called from the office, his voice low and tired, explaining that a partner meeting had run longer than planned. Mireia told him she understood. She covered his plate, changed out of the dress she had chosen for him, and ate alone at the dining table while the city moved beyond the penthouse windows. The second missed dinner came with flowers. White roses arrived before the call. Mireia stared at them for a long moment, already knowing what they meant. Kellen would not make it home. Again. By the fifth missed dinner, he stopped sounding sorry. By the first missed anniversary, he sent a diamond bracelet with a note written by someone from his office. Mireia held the box in her lap for several minutes, waiting to feel grateful. Instead, she felt the strange ache of being gifted something expensive by a man who no longer gave her his time. Private moments became harder to find. Their mornings turned into rushed departures. Their evenings became divided by calls, meetings, and late arrivals. He used to sit beside her after long days and rest his head against her shoulder. Now he entered the penthouse while speaking into his phone, nodded at her like a man passing through a hotel lobby, and disappeared into his study. Mireia tried to protect the marriage without making him feel accused. She planned quiet dinners. He canceled. She suggested a weekend away. He said the timing was bad. She asked if they could spend one evening without phones. He called the request unrealistic. Each refusal landed softly at first, but soft wounds still leave marks. One night, she sat across from his empty chair and realized she no longer knew which version of him would come home. The husband or the CEO. Kellen learned to send beauty where he refused to send presents. If he missed dinner, flowers arrived. If he forgot a promise, jewelry appeared. If he spoke coldly in the morning, a designer box waited by evening. Every gift carried the same silent message. Do not ask questions. Do not make this difficult. Accept this and let the matter rest. Mireya tried to appreciate the gesture. She knew some women would look at the silk ribbons, fine stones, and handwritten cards from luxury boutiques and call her fortunate. She knew the world saw a billionaire husband's gifts as proof of devotion, but Mireya knew the difference between love and compensation. Love remembered the little things. Love asked, "Did you eat?" Love noticed when her laughter faded. Love did not replace a hard conversation with a necklace. One evening, Kellen arrived home long after midnight. Mireya was still awake in the sitting room, a book open in her lap, though she had stopped reading an hour earlier. He placed a velvet box on the table beside her without sitting down. "For last night," he said. Last night had been their anniversary. She looked at the box next at him. "Kellen, I did not need a gift. I needed you." His expression tightened, not with regret, but irritation. "I'm doing everything I can to keep this company alive." "The company is alive," she said softly. "But we are fading." He glanced toward the hallway, already retreating in his mind. "You are emotional tonight." Mireya closed the book. "No, I'm lonely." He gave a tired sigh, as if her honesty was another meeting he had no strength to attend. That was when the gift on the table stopped looking beautiful. It looked like an answer to a question she had never asked. Mireya did not give up after one painful conversation. She had loved Kellen through fear, pressure, and uncertainty. She knew marriage required patience. She knew people changed under stress. She knew success could distort a man who had spent years fighting shame. So she tried again, in gentler ways. She asked him to join her at the foundation for one afternoon. He sent a donation instead. She invited him to meet families whose lives had been changed by their programs. He said his schedule was full. She asked for breakfast together before work. He took a call at the table and left before his coffee cooled. Each time she reached for him, he stepped back behind duty, reputation, and business urgency. He did not shout at first. He did something colder. He minimized her pain until even she began questioning whether she was asking for too much. When she told him they felt distant, he said she was tired. When she asked why he no longer confided in her, he said she was overthinking. When she said she missed him, he kissed her forehead and told her to rest. Rest. As if sleep would fix neglect. As if her heart was only worn out, not wounded. One afternoon, she visited his office unannounced, hoping to catch him between meetings. Through the glass wall, she saw him laughing with executives, alive in a way he rarely was at home. His face held warmth there. His voice carried energy there. He looked present there. When he noticed her, the warmth faded into polite surprise. "Mireya," he said, stepping out, "you should have called." The words were simple. Their meaning was not. His wife had become an interruption. There was a time when Kellen waited for Mireya's opinion. He had once sent speeches to her before anyone else. He had once asked whether his words sounded honest. He had once trusted her to tell him when pride had entered a decision before wisdom. Her voice had helped him rebuild more than a company. It had helped him rebuild himself. Now that same voice seemed to disturb him. When she questioned a public statement, he said the communications team had approved it. When she warned that a donor event felt too focused on his image, he said she did not understand corporate positioning. When she reminded him that the foundation existed for families, not applause, he stared at her with the patience of a man waiting for a child to stop arguing. That look hurt more than any raised voice. It told her he no longer saw her as a partner. He saw her as resistance. One evening, Mireya stood in the doorway of his study while he reviewed documents. She watched him mark pages with quick strokes of his pen, his attention fixed on everything except the woman in front of him. "Kellen," she said, "when did my honesty become a problem for you?" His pen stopped. For a moment, the old hymn seemed close enough to return, but he only looked up and said, "I need support right now, not criticism." Mireia felt the words settle inside her. Support. That was what he called silence now. She nodded once, not because she agreed, but because something had become painfully clear. The man who once needed her voice now wanted her quiet, and the wife he thought would break had begun to understand why she must not. The Rosethorn Family Renewal Foundation was not born from wealth. It was born from Mireia's memory. Long before she carried the Rosethorn name, she had seen how quickly one crisis could weaken a family. One medical bill, one lost job, one eviction notice, one child needing help no one could afford. She had watched people with good hearts become exhausted because the system expected them to survive with empty hands. So when Kellen's company began to recover, Mireia asked for one thing that belonged to purpose, not luxury. She wanted to build a foundation that did more than make Rosethorn Global look generous. She wanted a place where families could receive help before shame swallowed their voices. At first, Kellen admired the idea. He called it beautiful. He told her it showed the best side of the Rosethorn name. He signed the early documents with pride, grateful that his wife could bring warmth to a company still trying to regain trust. But Mireia did the real work. She met social workers, she visited shelters, she spoke with teachers, mothers, counselors, nurses, and community leaders. She read reports late into the night. She asked what families needed, not what wealthy donors preferred to fund. Some programs looked simple from the outside, but Mireia knew each one carried a life behind it. A therapy grant could help a child speak again after trauma. A housing fund could keep a mother from sleeping in her car. A school support program could keep a teenager from dropping out. To the public, the foundation was a charity. To Mireia, it was a promise. No family should feel invisible because they were struggling. Mireia never treated the foundation like an office project. She treated it like a living promise with names, faces, and stories attached to every decision. There was a young mother who arrived at the foundation holding a toddler in one arm and a folder of unpaid bills in the other. She had left a hard home with nothing but courage and a bag of clothes. The emergency grant gave her a safe room for 2 weeks, enough time to meet with a housing advisor and begin again. There was a boy who stopped speaking at school after losing his father. His teacher wrote to the foundation asking for therapy support because the family could not afford care. Mireia approved the request without turning his grief into a public campaign. Months later, the teacher sent a note saying the boy had started reading aloud again. There were families who needed grocery cards while waiting for new jobs, mothers who needed childcare support to attend interviews, children who needed counseling, school supplies, winter coats, hearing tests, and transportation to medical appointments. Mireia did not sit far away from this work. She visited program sites, she listened to staff, she read thank you letters herself, she remembered details others forgot. If a child drew a house with a yellow door, Mireia asked if the family had found stable housing. If a mother wrote that she wanted to go back to school, Mireia asked whether the foundation could help with training fees. The work shaped her. It gave her a kind of joy Kellen's wealth never could. Diamonds did not move her the way one family's fresh start did. The foundation was where Mireia felt most herself. It was the place where her childhood lessons became action. It was also the first place Kellen would try to take from her. At first, Kellen spoke about the foundation with admiration. He introduced Mireia at events as the heart of Rosethorn Global's charitable mission. He praised her compassion in front of donors. He told guests that her work reminded him why legacy needed service. Mireia believed him. She believed he saw the families behind every grant. She believed he understood that the foundation was not decoration for his company. It was not a ribbon tied around wealth to make power look gentle. It was a serious commitment to people who needed more than kind words. Over time, his language changed. Kellen began asking how much media attention each program received. He wanted reports that showed public reach, brand trust, and donor visibility. He asked why certain grants went to small families instead of larger programs that would attract headlines. He wondered aloud whether their impact stories were being used efficiently. Mireia hated that word, used. Families were not content. Children were not proof of corporate kindness. Mothers rebuilding their lives were not props for a quarterly presentation. She challenged him gently at first. She explained that some of the most important work happened privately. Not every family wanted cameras. Not every recovery belonged in a press release. Some dignity had to be protected, even when public attention might raise more money. Kellen listened less with each conversation. He began bringing corporate advisors into foundation meetings. They spoke of visibility, message alignment, and strategic value. They used polished language that made compassion sound like a business department. Mireya sat across from them, feeling a quiet warning settle inside her. Kellen was no longer asking how to serve. He was asking how to benefit. The first time Kellen called it our foundation in a press interview, Mireya let it pass. After all, his name was on the company, and the early funding had come through Rosethorn Resources. She did not need praise for every hour she spent building programs, hiring staff, calming donors, reviewing grants, and protecting families from public exposure. But the phrase kept growing. Our foundation has become one of Rosethorn Global's strongest social commitments, he said at an investor dinner. Our social impact wing reflects the future of responsible leadership, he told a magazine. Our reputation asset, he said once in a strategy meeting, speaking too quickly to notice how Mireya's face changed. That phrase cut deepest. Asset. Mireya looked at him across the conference table, waiting for him to correct himself. He did not. He moved on to another slide while a corporate advisor nodded in approval. No one else seemed disturbed. That was when Mireya understood how easily a woman's work could be absorbed by a powerful man's story. She had built the structure. He had begun taking the language. She had protected the families. He had begun claiming the credit. She had listened to mothers cry in private rooms. He had stood at podiums, calling their pain proof of his company's values. The public started repeating his version. Newsletters credited Rosethorn Global before mentioning her name. Donor packets placed Kellen's photograph near the front. Company executives spoke as if the foundation had grown from corporate strategy instead of Mireya's vision. Mireya did not want applause. She wanted honesty. Yet each time Kellen said "our," he pushed her further from the center of the work she had carried with both hands. The breaking point did not come during a public argument. It came during a private meeting in Kellen's office, where a consultant projected a proposal across the wall and described the foundation as an emotional bridge between corporate history and consumer trust. Mireya felt cold, not because the room lacked warmth, but because the language had stripped people out of the work. The consultant spoke about family stories as campaign material. He suggested selecting grant recipients whose lives had strong public appeal. He recommended filming short emotional profiles for investor events. He said the foundation's strongest value rested in its ability to soften Rosethorn Global's image after years of mistrust. Mireya waited for Kellen to stop him. Kellen did not. Instead, he leaned back in his chair and asked, "How soon could we prepare this for the next shareholder cycle?" Mireya turned to him slowly. "These are families," she said, "not marketing tools." Kellen gave her a measured look. "No one is saying they are not families. You are discussing their pain like campaign material. We are discussing visibility." "No," she said, "you are discussing control." The room went still. The consultant looked down at his tablet. One executive shifted in his seat. Kellen's eyes narrowed, not enough for others to notice, but enough for Mireya to feel the warning. He hated being challenged in front of people now. Later, when they were alone, he told her she had embarrassed him. Mireya answered that he had embarrassed the purpose of the foundation. He smiled without kindness. "You are too emotionally attached to this." She stared at him, stunned by the cruelty hidden inside that calm sentence. Of course she was emotionally attached. That was why the foundation worked. He saw a weakness where she had given her heart. After that meeting, Kellen stopped pretending the foundation was only Mireya's territory. He began requesting direct reports. He asked staff to copy his office on donor communications. He invited Rosethorn Global advisors to foundation planning sessions without asking Mireya first. When she questioned the change, he called it efficiency. Mireya knew it was not efficiency. It was possession. He wanted the foundation close enough to shape, close enough to display, close enough to use. But more than that, he wanted it away from her independent judgment. Mireya's compassion had once made him proud. Now it made her harder to control. Kellen did not like anything he could not control. One evening, she found a restructuring note left on his desk. It was not meant for her, but her name sat plainly in the middle of the page. The proposal suggested moving foundation operations beneath Rosethorn Global's corporate image division. Public messaging, donor selection, major programs, and leadership approvals would flow through company executives. Mireya read the lines twice. Her hands stayed steady, but her chest tightened. This was not support. This was removal with polite language. When Kellen entered the room, he did not look surprised to find her holding the paper. "You were going to discuss this with me?" she asked. "At the right time," he said. "The right time for me or the right time for you to make sure I had no choice?" His jaw flexed. "You are too close to the work to see the bigger strategy." Mireya placed the note on the desk. "No, Kellen, I see it clearly now." He believed he was protecting the company. She knew he was preparing to steal the one thing she had built without him. Alara Wren arrived at Rosethorn Global on a Monday morning with a black leather folder, a quiet expression, and no interest in being noticed. She'd been hired after Kellen's previous executive assistant resigned without a farewell speech, without a company-wide thank you email, and without the usual polite smile people gave when they were leaving on good terms. That alone made the staff curious. Anyone who worked close to Kellen Rosethorn either learned to survive his standards or left with their confidence bruised. Alara did not ask questions about the assistant before her. She signed the final paperwork, accepted her access card, and walked through the executive floor with careful attention. She noticed the glass walls, the polished floors, the soft voices, and the way employees lowered their tone whenever Kellen's name entered a conversation. Nothing about the office intimidated her. She had worked for difficult people before. She understood powerful men who believed every second of delay was disrespect. She understood meetings that changed 3 times before noon. She understood executives who gave instructions without context and expected perfection by evening. But Kellen's office carried a different kind of pressure. His schedule was packed with investor calls, legal briefings, board updates, donor meetings, and strategy reviews. Every hour mattered. Every message needed filtering. Every meeting request came with hidden importance. Alara learned fast because she had to. Kellen noticed. By the end of her first week, he stopped repeating instructions. By the second week, he trusted her to rearrange meetings without asking. By the third, he began sending messages with only 3 words, knowing she would understand the rest. To everyone else, Alara looked like a new secretary settling into the job. To Kellen, she looked useful. To Mireya, who saw her once across the executive hallway, Alara looked like a woman who listened more than she spoke. That made her different. Alara's calm was not weakness. It was discipline. She moved through Rosethorn Global with quiet precision, always prepared, never rushed, never careless. If Kellen asked for a file, it was already arranged. If a meeting ran late, she had already adjusted the next one. If an investor arrived early, she knew where to place them, what to offer them, and which topics to avoid until Kellen entered. People underestimated her because she rarely spoke without reason. That was their mistake. Alara noticed the things others overlooked. She noticed which board members smiled at Kellen in public, but sent private notes to Corvin Say afterward. She noticed which executives praised Mireya's foundation when donors were present, but called it soft spending in closed meetings. She noticed which staff members looked nervous after leaving Kellen's office. Most of all, she noticed Kellen's patterns. He liked control disguised as order. He gave compliments that felt like rewards. He used silence to make people explain themselves too much. He remembered weakness and returned to it when it served him. He was not always cruel, but when pride entered him, kindness left the room first. Alara also noticed Mireya. The first time she saw her properly, Mireya was leaving a foundation meeting with a stack of folders pressed against her chest. 2 junior staff members stopped her with questions. Mireya did not rush them. She listened with full attention, gave clear answers, and thanked them by name. Ilara watched from a distance. There was no performance in Mireya's kindness, no need to prove she mattered, no hunger for praise. That stayed with Ilara. Because in Rosethorn Global, many people used softness as decoration. Mireya used it as strength. Kellen began keeping Ilara close because she made his life easier. At least, that was how it started. She knew his schedule before he asked. She filtered calls with good judgment. She could summarize a 20-page briefing into 3 sharp points and leave out nothing important. She corrected mistakes without making him feel delayed. For a man who valued control, Ilara's competence felt convenient. Soon, he asked her to stay later. First, it was for investor preparation. Next, legal follow-ups. After that, board strategy notes. The request sounded reasonable on paper, but the timing changed the way people looked at her. Lights stayed on in Kellen's office long after the executive floor thinned. His door remained closed. Ilara's desk remained active. Kellen began inviting her to business dinners too. He said he needed her there to track commitments, record follow-ups, and manage delicate scheduling. Ilara accepted because refusing a new executive position was not simple. She did the work. She kept her tone professional. She never encouraged personal closeness. But Kellen enjoyed the attention those invitations created. At dinners, he praised her in front of people who had known Mireya for years. He called Ilara indispensable in a tone that sounded slightly too warm. He asked for her opinion on matters that did not need her input. He smiled when other executives looked from Ilara to Mireya and grew uncomfortable. Ilara began to understand. Kellen was not only valuing her work, he was using her presence. There were moments when Mireya entered a room and Kellen suddenly mentioned Ilara's efficiency. Moments when he compared how quickly Ilara handled tasks to how emotionally attached Mireya had become to the foundation. Ilara heard the edge beneath his words. He was building a story. She did not yet know the full purpose, but she knew enough to feel uneasy. The whispers started in small places, near the coffee station, outside the elevators, in the hallway after meetings. No one said anything too loudly, but gossip does not need volume to travel. It only needs curiosity and people willing to feed it. Ilara heard her name more than once. At first, she ignored it. She had spent enough time in executive offices to know that a young woman working close to a powerful man often became a target for lazy assumptions. Competence was rarely allowed to stand alone. People preferred a scandal because scandal required less thinking. But this was different. The rumors did not fade. They grew because Kellen allowed them to grow. He did not correct the tone when an executive joked that Ilara knew his schedule better than his wife. He did not push back when a board advisor asked if she would be joining another private dinner. He did not change his behavior when people looked at Mireya with pity disguised as politeness. He let the story breathe. Mireya felt the shift everywhere. Conversations stopped when she entered certain corners of the office. Staff members greeted her with softer voices. Donors watched her face too closely when Kellen arrived with Ilara at his side. Even women who once envied Mireya's marriage now offered sympathy with their eyes. Kellen noticed that too. Worse, he seemed satisfied. He had found a way to hurt Mireya without raising his voice. He had found a way to make her question what others believed. He had found a way to turn the office into a mirror where everyone waited to see her crack. Ilara saw it clearly now. Her name was not being dragged by accident. It was being placed exactly where Kellen wanted it, between a wife and her dignity. Mireya heard the gossip. Of course she did. A woman always knows when a room has started speaking about her before she enters it. She hears it in the sudden quiet. She sees it in the quick glances. She feels it in the way people offer kindness without being asked, as if they already know a pain she has not confessed. But Mireya refused to become the scene Kellen wanted. She did not confront Ilara in the hallway. She did not search Kellen's phone in public panic. She did not cry in the executive bathroom while staff traded opinions outside the door. She did not give his advisors a single emotional outburst to record, twist, or repeat. That did not mean she felt nothing. At home, the silence between her and Kellen grew heavy. At the foundation, she sometimes paused over documents because one careless memory had cut through her focus. At night, she would remember the man who once held her hand like it steadied him, and she would wonder how that same man had learned to wound her with such control. Still, she held herself together, not for pride, for clarity. She understood that Kellen knew her heart. He knew she loved deeply. He knew public humiliation would hurt her more than private cruelty because she valued dignity. If she reacted too quickly, he would use that reaction as proof that she was unstable, jealous, or unfit to lead. So, Mireya watched. She watched Kellen praise Alara too warmly. She watched Corvin observe from a distance. She watched the company slowly accept a lie Kellen had never clearly spoken. Her quiet was not surrender. It was preparation. Alara did not enjoy the role Kellen had placed around her. Each day it became clearer that he liked the discomfort her presence created. He would call her into meetings where she was not needed. He would ask her to stand near him during donor conversations. He would mention her name when Mireya was close enough to hear, as if comparing two women without saying the comparison aloud. Alara stayed professional, but her respect for him weakened. She had taken the role to work, not to become part of a marriage wound. She had built her life with care. She knew how fast a woman's reputation could be stained by a powerful man's behavior, even when she had done nothing wrong. Kellen seemed unconcerned about that. That told her something important. He was willing to damage both women if it gave him control. Mireya also understood more than she said. She greeted Alara politely. She never treated her like an enemy. That grace unsettled Alara in the best way. It proved Mireya was not careless with blame. She knew the difference between the person holding the knife and the person being used as the handle. So let me ask you this. If you were Mireya, what would you do? Would you confront your husband immediately in front of everyone and demand the truth? Or would you stay calm, watch his next move, and gather enough proof so no one could twist your pain against you? Write your answer in the comment section. And if you are enjoying this story, please like this video, share it, and subscribe to Love Tales with Mr. Easton for more emotional stories about love, betrayal, dignity, and second chances. Because Mireya's silence was about to become the one thing Kellen never prepared for. Alara Wren understood attention from powerful men. She had seen it before in other offices, at other companies, in rooms where men with money believed every woman near them should feel honored by their approval. A compliment here, a longer glance there, a private invitation spoken with professional language but carrying another meaning beneath it. So when Kellen began keeping her close, Alara did not feel chosen. She felt cautious. He praised her efficiency in front of executives. He asked for her notes even when the meeting did not require them. He called her into his office for decisions his senior team had already handled. Anyone watching from the outside might have believed Kellen trusted her more than most people. Alara knew better. His praise was not warm, it was useful. He liked what her presence created. He liked the quiet discomfort when Mireya entered a room and found Alara near his desk. He liked how people paused when he said Alara's name too often. He liked how power allowed him to bend a harmless working relationship into a weapon without ever admitting what he was doing. Alara did not smile for those games. She kept her posture straight. She answered with respect. She took notes, managed schedules, and protected her own name by staying professional in every space. But each day, Kellen's behavior made something clearer. He did not care what the rumors did to her reputation. He did not care what they did to Mireya's heart. He cared only that the rumors served him. That truth made Alara watch him with different eyes. She stopped seeing only the demanding CEO. She began seeing a man willing to use two women at once, one to wound, the other to carry the blame. Years before Alara entered Rosethorn Global, her family had faced a season that nearly broke them. Her younger brother, Solen, had always been full of movement. He ran before he walked with care. He climbed trees before anyone finished warning him. He loved soccer, music, jokes, and anything that made the house feel alive. To Alara, he was more than her brother. He was the joy in their home. That changed after the accident. A rainy afternoon, a careless driver, and one violent moment left Solen facing months of therapy his family could not afford. The doctors spoke with kindness, but their bills did not. Each appointment had a cost. Each session carried another decision: pay for treatment or pay for rent. continue therapy, or buy groceries. Hope became something they had to budget. Alara watched her parents age in weeks. Her mother stopped sleeping. Her father took extra repair work until his hands shook at the dinner table. Alara picked up shifts, filled forms, called offices, and searched for assistance programs that either had long waiting lists or requirements her family barely missed. Solen tried to smile through it. That hurt Alara most. He would say he was fine when his eyes said otherwise. He would joke about his slow progress because he did not want their mother to cry. He would pretend one missed session did not matter, though everyone knew consistency was the only path forward. Alara learned something painful during that time. Love alone did not pay for recovery. A family could be devoted, hardworking, and honest, yet still stand one bill away from losing the help their child needed. Alara first heard about the Rosethorn Family Renewal Foundation from a hospital social worker. The woman handed her a small card after one of Solen's appointments and told her to apply. Alara almost refused. By then, she had filled out so many forms that Hope felt tiring. Each rejection had taught her to expect polite disappointment. Still, that night, she sat at the kitchen table and completed the application. She wrote about Solen's accident. She wrote about the therapy plan. She wrote about the bills, the missed sessions, and the fear that her brother's progress would stop because their family had run out of money before he ran out of courage. She submitted it close to midnight. For days, she checked her email between work shifts. Her mother pretended not to watch her face each time her phone made a sound. Solen told her not to worry, but he asked about the application more than once. The approval came on a quiet morning. Alara read it twice before she understood. The foundation would cover Solen's therapy support for the next stage of recovery. It would also help with transportation costs, so missed appointments would no longer depend on borrowed cars, unpaid rides, or impossible choices. Her mother cried into both hands. Her father walked outside and stood by the fence for a long time because he did not want the family to see him break down. Solené only whispered, "So I get to keep going?" Alara nodded, unable to speak. That was the day Mireya's foundation became more than a name on paper. To Alara's family, it became the reason a door stayed open when life had almost closed it. A week after the approval, an envelope arrived at the Wren home. It was simple. Cream paper, neat handwriting, no dramatic logo, no public announcement, no request for a photograph or interview. Alara opened it at the kitchen table while Solen sat across from her, trying to stretch his injured leg beneath the chair. Inside was a short handwritten note from Mireya Rosethorn. It did not sound like a corporate message. It sounded like a person. Mireya wrote that Solené's future was not over because one season had become hard. She wrote that healing often moved slowly, but slow progress still mattered. She told him to keep showing up for himself, even on days when his body felt tired and his hope felt thin. Solen asked Alara to read it again, so she did. Her mother listened from the sink with tears on her cheeks. Her father stood in the doorway, his work shirt dusty, his eyes lowered. No one in that house had met Mireya, yet her words had entered with care. Alara folded the note and placed it back inside the envelope. She kept it. Years passed. Solen improved. Their family recovered one step at a time. Life moved forward, but Alara never threw the note away. It stayed tucked inside a small box with documents that mattered, proof that someone with power had chosen kindness without demanding praise. That memory returned the first time Alara watched Kellen speak about Mireya with cold impatience. It returned again when he used the foundation like a business trophy. By the time the rumors began, Alara already knew something Kellen had forgotten. Mireya's work had touched real lives. One of them was her brother's. Alara tried at first to believe Kellen was only careless. Careless men cause damage without thinking. Careless men enjoy attention without measuring the cost. Careless men let rumors grow because correction feels inconvenient. But Kellen was not careless. He was precise. That was what disturbed her. He knew when to mention her name. He knew which rooms had the right audience. He knew when Mireya was close enough to hear and when executives were close enough to repeat. He placed Alara beside him at the right dinners, near the right donors, during the right conversations. None of it looked obvious enough to accuse him, yet all of it pointed in one direction. He wanted Mireya weakened. Alara began noticing how often the Foundation appeared near those moments. A rumor would flare, and soon after, Kellen would question Mireya's judgment. A whisper would spread, and a consultant would suggest stronger corporate oversight. Someone would call Mireya emotional, and Kellen would respond with silence instead of defense. Silence, Alara realized, was one of his tools. He did not need to say Mireya was unstable. He only needed enough people to wonder. That realization changed everything. Alara thought of Solène, learning to walk with confidence again. She thought of the note kept in her box. She thought of Mireya sitting through public pity while the man who should have protected her sharpened the lie. This was not marriage tension. This was a planned removal wrapped in personal humiliation. Kellen was trying to damage the woman who had helped Alara's family when they had nothing to offer in return. And Alara knew she had reached the line where staying neutral meant choosing the wrong side. That evening, Alara went home and opened the small box in her closet. The note was still there. The paper had softened at the folds. The ink had not faded much. Mireya's words still held the same quiet care they had carried years earlier. Your future is not over because this season is hard. Alara sat on the edge of her bed and read the line again. She thought about Solène now, stronger, taller, laughing more freely than he had during those painful months. She thought about her parents, who had survived that season with their dignity intact, because strangers at a foundation chose to help without making them beg. Mireya had never known Alara's name back then. She had helped anyway. Now, Alara knew Mireya's name. She knew her face. She knew her pain. More than that, she knew the lie being built around her. That knowledge demanded a choice. If Alara stayed silent, Kellen would continue using her as proof of a false story. If she protected her job above the truth, Mireya could lose the foundation. Families like Solène's could lose the kind of help that had changed his life. If Alara looked away, she would become part of the harm, even without speaking a single lie. The next morning, she returned to Rosethorn Global with a different purpose. She still answered calls. She still arranged meetings. She still stood outside Kellen's office with the same calm expression. But inside, something had shifted. She began paying attention with intent. She saved messages. She tracked changes. She noted names, times, meetings, and every careful step Kellen took toward Mireya's removal. Alara had entered the company as his secretary. She would not leave the truth buried under his version of the story. Alara found the first email by accident, but she did not dismiss what it showed. Kellen had asked her to prepare a briefing folder for the next Foundation restructuring meeting. The request sounded normal. He wanted copies of previous board notes, donor summaries, projected public impact reports, and legal review documents. Alara opened the shared executive archive with her usual care, searching by date and subject line. One folder had been mislabeled. It sat under General Corporate Communications, but the sender names made her pause. Kellen Rosethorn, Corvin Say, two legal consultants whose names she had seen only on confidential board matters. Alara did not open it out of curiosity. She opened it because Kellen had requested Foundation documents, and this file clearly related to the same matter. At first, she expected formal restructuring language, something dry, something legal, something she would print, place in order, and forget by evening. Instead, she read one sentence that made her hand freeze over the keyboard. We need to establish concerns around Mrs. Rosethorn's emotional fitness before the committee vote. Alara read it again. Her breath slowed. The next email was worse. Corvin suggested timing the concern after the shareholder meeting, when public perception may already be shifting. Another message referenced the rumors around Alara as a useful pressure point. Kellen did not correct the phrase. He responded with a short approval and asked for a clean sequence of steps. Alara sat still at her desk while the executive floor moved around her. A phone rang nearby. Someone laughed near the elevator. Kellen's office door remained closed. To everyone else, the day continued. For Alara, the truth had taken shape. The rumors were not a mistake. They were part of his plan. Alara had never trusted Corvin Say. He had the polished patience of a man who preferred other people to carry out his cruelty for him. He rarely raised his voice. He rarely made direct accusations. He used concern as a blade and advice as a cover. In meetings, he spoke slowly, giving every sentence enough space to sound reasonable before its harm became clear. The emails showed his influence everywhere. Corvin advised Kellen to avoid direct attacks on Mireya. He wrote that public sympathy often favored a humiliated wife, unless doubt appeared first. If staff, donors, and board members began viewing Mireya as emotionally strained, any future decision against her would feel less like punishment and more like responsible leadership. Alara's stomach tightened as she read. This was not only Kellen losing respect for his wife. This was strategy. Corvin suggested small steps. Limit Mireya's access to some donor calls, question her judgment in private committee notes, highlight her personal distress without naming a cause, avoid written claims that could look openly hostile. Let the office rumors do the work no executive should say aloud. Kellen's replies were short, but each one carried approval. Proceed. Keep it discreet. Prepare language for the board packet. Alara leaned back in her chair, feeling the weight of what she had found. She thought of Mireya greeting foundation workers by name. She thought of the children and mothers who depended on those programs. She thought of Solène, who had kept going because Mireya's foundation had given him a chance. Corvin saw a leadership obstacle. Kellen saw a wife he could weaken. Alara saw a woman being surrounded by polite words meant to strip her of everything she had built. The most painful part was how carefully they planned to use emotion against Mireya. Kellen knew his wife loved the foundation. He knew she would defend it with her whole heart. He knew any threat to its mission would wound her. Instead of respecting that devotion, he planned to twist it into evidence against her. One email included notes for a future board discussion. Mrs. Rosethorn's attachment to the foundation may impair objective governance. Another line read, recent personal strain may affect her ability to make balanced leadership decisions. Alara stared at those words with anger rising beneath her calm face. They were preparing to punish Mireya for caring. They wanted her passion to look like instability, her grief to look like weakness, her silence to look like avoidance, her objections to look like emotional resistance. Every human response she gave could be used against her if the room had been trained to expect breakdown. The secretary rumors fit into that pattern. If people believed Kellen had moved on with Alara, Mireya's pain would look personal. If Mireya objected to the foundation takeover, they could suggest jealousy, humiliation, or wounded pride had clouded her judgment. If she stayed quiet, they could say she had withdrawn from leadership. Every path had been shaped to corner her. Alara felt the old note from Mireya in her memory, the one written to Solène years ago. Your future is not over because this season is hard. Mireya had offered that kindness to a boy she had never met. Now, her own husband was preparing to make her pain look like proof that she deserved to be removed. Alara closed the email and opened the next file. She needed everything. Not one message. All of it. The legal documents made the purpose clear. Kellen wanted Mireya removed from foundation leadership, but he did not want the move to look personal. The proposal used careful language. It spoke of governance improvements, streamlined reporting, donor confidence, executive accountability, and brand alignment. Each phrase sounded harmless until Alara read what those phrases would do. Mireya's approval authority would be reduced. Program decisions would require corporate review. Donor communication would pass through Rosethorn Global's executive messaging team. Foundation staffing changes would need approval from Kellen's office. Grant priorities would be adjusted to match broader corporate objectives. Alara read the pages slowly, refusing to miss a detail. This was not support. This was control with clean formatting. A section near the end listed leadership transition options. Mireya's name appeared beside words like advisory role and honorary chair. Those titles looked respectful from far away, but Alara understood them. They would leave Mireya with ceremonies, speeches, and photographs while removing her real power. She would become the face of the foundation, not its protector. That thought angered Alara more than any rumor. Mireya had built something that reached families others ignored. Kellen's team wanted to turn it into a department that served public image first and people second. The foundation's private mercy would become corporate messaging. Its quiet grants would become selected stories. Its human center would be replaced by approval chains and image reports. Alara copied the file onto a secure drive. Her hands were steady now. Fear had passed. What remained was duty. If Kellen wanted paperwork, Alara would give him paperwork, only not the kind he expected. Alara did not rush. Rushing created mistakes, and mistakes gave powerful people room to deny the truth. For the next several days, she gathered proof with discipline. She printed email chains in order, including sender names, dates, times, and replies. She saved calendar records showing when Mireya had been quietly excluded from meetings connected to her own foundation. She copied meeting notes where Corvin suggested leadership concerns before any formal issue had been raised. She included legal drafts. She included donor control proposals. She included the revised foundation structure. She included the messaging plan designed to frame the takeover as responsible, compassionate, and necessary. Each document entered the folder because it showed one part of the larger truth. Kellen was not acting from concern. He was not trying to protect families. He was not trying to rescue the foundation from disorder. He was preparing to remove his wife while using a false personal scandal to weaken her credibility. Alara chose a blue folder from the supply cabinet. She could have chosen black. She could have chosen plain white, but blue felt right. Calm, clear, hard to ignore on a polished boardroom table, a quiet color for a truth that did not need shouting. She labeled nothing on the cover. If anyone saw it too soon, it would look like any other executive file. Inside, it held enough to change the course of the shareholder meeting. At night, Alara took the folder home and placed it on her kitchen table. She sat across from it for a long time. She knew what this could cost her job, her reputation, her safety inside the industry. Still, she thought of Mireya. She thought of Solène. She opened the folder once more and checked every page. Alara waited until the foundation office had grown quiet. Most of the staff had gone home. The reception lights were low. A cleaner moved somewhere down the hallway, pushing a cart with soft wheels. Rain touched the windows in gentle bursts, blurring the city beyond the glass. Mireya was still at her desk. That did not surprise Alara. A grant request sat open before her. Beside it were handwritten notes, family records, housing support forms, and a list of urgent cases waiting for review. Even with her own marriage breaking under public whispers, Mireya was still working for people who needed help before morning. Alara stood at the doorway. Mireya? Mireya looked up, surprised but not unkind. Alara, is something wrong? Alara stepped inside, holding the blue folder against her chest. For the first time in weeks, words did not come easily. Not because she doubted the truth, but because she knew the pain it would bring. Mireya had already endured enough. Still, mercy without truth would only leave her exposed. I need to tell you something before he does, Alara said. Mireya's expression changed. The softness remained, but her eyes sharpened. Alara walked to the desk and placed the blue folder in front of her. Your husband plans to remove you from the foundation board after the shareholder meeting, she said. He is using my name to create a story that makes you look too emotional to lead. Mireya did not reach for the folder immediately. She looked at it as if she already felt the wound inside. At last, she opened it. Page by page, Kellen's plan entered the room. Alara stood quietly, no longer his secretary in that moment, but the witness Mireya never expected to need. Mireya read the first page without moving. Her eyes moved across Kellen's name, Corvin's replies, the legal notes, and the cold phrases used to describe her like a problem that needed removal. For a moment, the office felt too still. The grant request on her desk, the family files, the lamp beside her hand, even Alara standing across from her, all faded beneath the weight of what she was reading. Kellen had not only neglected her, he had studied her. He had taken her patience, her grief, her loyalty, and her love for the foundation and turned them into weaknesses his advisors could use. Every line in the folder carried a hidden insult: emotional fitness, leadership concern, personal strain, public perception. Mireya's fingers rested on one page longer than the others. It was a note about timing. The plan suggested that Kellen should let the secretary rumors grow before the board reviewed her role. If she reacted with pain, they would call it instability. If she stayed quiet, they would call it withdrawal. If she defended the foundation, they would call it emotional attachment. He had built a trap around every possible response. Alara watched her carefully, expecting tears or anger. Mireia gave neither at first. Her face stayed calm, but her heart felt as if a door had closed somewhere deep inside her. She remembered the man who once asked her to help him become gentle. She remembered believing him. She remembered wearing his ring with pride. Now, his own signature sat beneath a plan to shame her. At last, Mireia closed the folder. Her voice came out low. He did not only want the foundation, he wanted the room to believe I deserved to lose it. Alara expected Mireia to demand a confrontation. Any woman would have understood that reaction. Kellen had used their marriage, Alara's name, and the foundation's future as pieces in a cruel game. He had taken private pain and prepared to turn it into public evidence. Anger would have been natural. A shouting match would have been human. Mireia did not choose that path. She rose from her chair and walked toward the window. Rain slid down the glass in thin lines. Below, New York moved with its usual rush, unaware that a marriage had just changed inside a quiet office. For several minutes, Mireia said nothing. Alara stayed near the desk, unsure whether to speak. At last, Mireia turned back. "I will not become the woman he needs me to be," she said. Alara's brow softened. "What does that mean?" "It means I will not scream so he can call me unstable. I will not threaten him so Corvin can write another note. I will not chase him through the office so reporters can turn my pain into entertainment." Her voice remained steady, though her eyes carried hurt. "He wants revenge from me, because revenge is easy to dismiss. Truth is harder." Alara looked at the blue folder. "Truth still has a cost." Mireia nodded. "So does silence." That was the moment Alara understood why Kellen had underestimated his wife so deeply. He had mistaken grace for weakness. He had mistaken restraint for fear. He had mistaken love for permission. Mireia returned to the desk and opened the folder again. "We protect the foundation first," she said. "My heart can grieve later." That sentence told Alara everything. Mireia was wounded, but she was not broken. By morning, Mireia had already made her first call. She did not contact Kellen. She did not confront Corvin. She did not warn the board with raw emotion or send angry messages that could be forwarded, edited, or taken out of context. Instead, she called a woman she trusted from a past donor dispute, a discreet attorney named Vivian Hale. Vivian had built her career protecting charities from powerful donors who wanted control in exchange for money. She understood contracts. She understood reputation. Most of all, she understood that polite language could hide ruthless intentions. Mireia met her in a small private office far from Rosethorn Global. No cameras, no assistants, no family names spoken too loudly. Alara came with her, carrying copies of the documents in a plain bag. The blue folder stayed hidden, reserved for the right moment. Vivian read page after page in silence, marking sections with a silver pen. When she finished, she looked at Mireia. "This is more than a marital matter," Vivian said. "This is an attempt to shift governance control through reputational pressure." Mireia did not flinch. "What do we need?" "Original foundation documents, donor agreements, board bylaws, voting requirements, any clause that separates foundation authority from Rosethorn Global's corporate structure." Mireia had expected that answer. "I have them." Vivian studied her more closely. "You prepared?" "I hoped I would never need to," Mireia said. "That is different." The legal team stayed small. Vivian brought in one associate and one nonprofit governance specialist. No one else, no leaks, no panic, no public statement before the facts were secured. Kellen had built his plan around spectacle. Mireia built hers around proof. And proof, unlike pride, did not need applause to stand. For 3 nights, Mireia searched through the foundation's original documents. She sat at her dining table long after the penthouse had gone quiet, surrounded by binders, old donor packets, incorporation records, and early board agreements. The home around her still carried signs of a marriage, framed images, shared books, his jacket over a chair, yet the papers before her reminded her of the one part of her life that still belonged to purpose. The foundation had not been created carelessly. In its early days, Mireia had insisted on protections many people thought unnecessary. She had wanted the work to remain safe from corporate mood swings, public relations cycles, and executive pressure. Back then, Kellen had teased her for being thorough, now that thoroughness became armor. Vivian pointed to one clause first. Major program control could not be transferred to any corporate division without approval from an independent foundation committee. Another clause stated that donor-restricted funds could not be redirected for brand campaigns, reputation repair, or image management. A third clause required written consent from the founding director before any leadership role became ceremonial or advisory. Mireia read that line twice. Founding director, not wife, not public face, not decorative name beside a billionaire, founding director. For the first time in days, her breath eased. Kellen had power, but he did not have a clean path. Corvin had strategy, but he had not built the foundation. The legal team began preparing a response. They gathered donor letters, board records, program audits, and impact reports that showed Mireia's leadership was active, informed, and essential. Every document answered the lie before Kellen could speak it. He wanted to paint her as unfit. The record showed a woman who had never stopped working. While Mireia worked with Vivian, Alara returned to Rosethorn Global as if nothing had changed. She still wore calm suits. She still answered Kellen's calls. She still adjusted his calendar and placed briefing files on his desk. She still responded with the same professional tone that made him believe she remained exactly where he had placed her. That belief became his weakness. Kellen grew more confident as the shareholder meeting approached. He stopped guarding certain phrases. He asked Alara to schedule private prep sessions with Corvin. He requested donor perception summaries. He dictated notes about foundation leadership in a voice so controlled it almost sounded reasonable. Alara documented everything. She saved calendar invitations, showing Mireia had been excluded from meetings tied to her own work. She copied revised board language that softened the takeover into harmless words. She recorded the names of those present when Kellen questioned Mireia's emotional balance. She preserved messages where Corvin warned against moving too soon before public sympathy shifted. Each piece mattered, not because one email told the whole truth, but because together they formed a clear path from rumor to removal. Kellen watched Mireia become quieter and believed shame had weakened her. He watched Alara carry out instructions and believed loyalty had secured her. He stood between two women and failed to understand that both had stopped living inside the story he created. One afternoon, he looked at Alara from across his desk. "After the meeting, things will be simpler," he said. Alara kept her expression neutral. "Yes, sir." He smiled, pleased with her answer. She lowered her eyes to the tablet in her hand, where his next meeting note had already been saved. Kellen thought silence meant obedience. Alara knew silence could also mean a witness was still listening. The morning of the shareholder meeting arrived clear and cold. Mireia woke before sunrise, though she had barely slept. For a while she sat at the edge of the bed, listening to the quiet penthouse around her. Kellen's side of the room was untouched. He had slept in his private suite again, choosing distance even on the day he planned to shame her. She stood and crossed to the wardrobe. Her cream suit hung ready. She chose it because it was simple, elegant, and calm. Nothing about it begged for pity. Nothing about it announced war. She dressed slowly, buttoned the jacket, fixed her hair, and looked at herself in the mirror. Her face held tiredness. Her eyes held resolve. On the dresser sat her wedding ring. For 7 years, that ring had meant love, promise, partnership, and hope. It had rested on her hand through hard seasons and public celebrations. It had touched Kellen's hand on nights when he needed comfort. It had shone beneath cameras when the world called them a perfect couple. Mireia picked it up. For a moment, memory rose sharp enough to hurt. His sunrise proposal, his trembling honesty, the young man who asked to learn gentleness with her. She closed her eyes, opened them again, and slid the ring onto a thin chain instead of her finger. She fastened the chain beneath her blouse, close to her heart, but no longer visible to the world. It was not a show. It was a private truth. She was not ready to pretend the marriage had meant nothing. She was also done letting it define her. When she entered the conference hall later that morning, Kellen's eyes dropped to her bare hand. His jaw tightened. Mireya walked past him with quiet grace. For the first time, she was not walking beside his power. She was walking toward her own. By the time Mireya reached her seat inside the glass conference hall, the room had already begun to fill with people who believed they had come to watch business history. Board members settled around the long table. Investors adjusted their jackets and reviewed the glossy reports placed before them. Senior executives exchanged careful greetings. Business reporters waited near the back with open notebooks, watching for a line that would become the next headline. Kellen stood near the front with his usual calm expression. To anyone else, he looked ready. Mireya saw more than that. She saw the small pause when his eyes dropped to her left hand. She saw the brief tightening in his jaw when he noticed the missing ring. She saw the question he refused to ask in front of others. She gave him no explanation. Her wedding ring rested on the chain beneath her blouse, close enough for memory, hidden enough for truth. She had not removed it to wound him. She had removed it because her hand would no longer carry a promise he had already betrayed. Across the room, Alara stood near the executive staff, the blue folder held close to her side. Her face gave away nothing. She looked like the same efficient secretary Kellen believed he controlled. That was what made the moment dangerous for him. Kellen thought he knew every person in that room. He thought the board admired him. He thought the reporters would chase his version first. He thought Mireya's silence meant fear. He thought Alara's obedience meant loyalty. As the doors closed and the meeting began, Mireya folded her hands on the table. She was not there to fight for his love. She was there to protect what he had tried to take. Kellen began with the kind of speech that made powerful people relax. His voice was steady. His timing was smooth. Every slide behind him had been shaped to impress. Revenue growth, market recovery, new partnerships, projected expansion, stronger investor trust, future acquisitions in cities where Rosethorn Global wanted deeper influence. The room listened with approval. Kellen spoke of discipline as if he had never confused it with control. He spoke of leadership as if he had never used it to silence the woman who had helped rebuild his judgment. He spoke of legacy as if the word still belonged to something honorable in his mouth. Investors nodded, executives smiled. Board members who had once questioned his ability now watched him like a man who had proven them wrong. For a moment, it was easy to see why the world trusted him. Kellen knew how to command attention. He knew where to pause. He knew when to soften his tone and when to sharpen it. He knew how to make numbers sound like victory and risk sound like opportunity. Mireya watched without changing expression. She remembered the younger Kellen who had once stayed awake over broken reports, terrified that his father's mistakes would crush him. She remembered reading his speech drafts and marking the lines that felt too cold. She remembered telling him that trust was not built by sounding strong, it was built by telling the truth. Now he stood before them, polished and praised, ready to use that same skill against her. When the final growth chart disappeared from the screen, Kellen closed his folder. The next slide appeared. Charitable Operations Restructuring Proposal. Mireya's fingers stayed still. Alara's grip tightened around the blue folder. Kellen smiled as if the room still belonged to him. Kellen stepped away from the podium. The movement drew attention because it broke the rhythm of his presentation. Until that point, the meeting had followed the usual pattern. Numbers, applause, questions, reassurance. The foundation vote should have come next. A few board members adjusted their papers, ready to discuss restructuring. Kellen did not look at the documents. He looked at Mireya. "There is one personal matter I need to address before this board votes on restructuring our charitable operations," he said. The room shifted. Reporters lifted their heads. Investors glanced at one another. Adeline Morrow, the board chairwoman, stopped turning a page. Mireya felt every eye begin to measure the space between husband and wife. Kellen's face held practiced regret. "My marriage has been under strain for some time," he continued. "I will no longer hide the truth." He let the pause stretch. Mireya understood the performance. He wanted the room to feel sympathy before suspicion. He wanted his confession to sound brave instead of cruel. He wanted every person present to believe he was taking control of a painful private matter before it affected company leadership. His eyes moved toward Alara. "I'm leaving my wife for my secretary." A hard silence followed. One executive lowered his pen. A reporter's lips parted in shock. Someone near the back whispered Kellen's name under their breath. The air inside the room changed as every face turned toward Mireya. They waited for tears. They waited for anger. They waited for collapse. Kellen waited too. Mireya gave him none of it. She looked at him with calm eyes, the kind that made his confidence falter for the first time that morning. Kellen turned toward Alara with a faint smile. "Alara," he said, his voice softer now. It was the tone of a man inviting someone to play the role he had written for her. He expected her to walk to his side, to confirm the scandal without needing details, to stand close enough for every camera to understand what he wanted them to believe. Alara moved. The room watched, but she did not go to Kellen. She walked past him. His smile faded before he could stop it. Every step she took toward Mireya changed the room more than any speech could have. The whispers stopped. The reporters leaned forward. Adeline. Marrow's eyes narrowed with sudden focus. Corvin Say, seated near the side of the table, went still. Mireya did not rise. She only turned slightly as Alara reached her chair. Alara placed the blue folder on the boardroom table. The sound was quiet, but it cut through the room with force. She rested one hand on the back of Mireya's seat, steady and clear. Kellen's voice dropped. "What are you doing?" Alara looked at him without fear. "I was never your secret," she said. "I was her witness." For the first time, Kellen looked unsure of the floor beneath him. Adeline reached for the folder. Alara gently slid copies toward the legal advisor and the Foundation committee. "These documents show that Mr. Rosethorn planned to use a false personal narrative to damage Mrs. Rosethorn's credibility," Alara said. "The goal was to remove her from the foundation she built." Kellen's face hardened. "This is private company strategy." Mireya stood. "No," she said. "This is my life's work." The room belonged to Mireya now. She did not take it by shouting. She took it by standing with the kind of calm that made every lie around her look small. Kellen stared at her as if he still expected emotion to weaken her. But the woman before him was not the wife who waited alone at dinner tables, wondering when he would come home. She was not the woman who accepted flowers in place of apologies. She was not the woman he could silence with a tired sigh. She walked to the front of the table. Her voice stayed clear. "I have stood beside this company because I believed loyalty mattered," she said. "I still believe that. But loyalty without respect becomes captivity. Marriage does not give anyone the right to erase your voice. Power does not give anyone the right to rewrite the truth." No one moved. Mireya looked from the board members to the Foundation committee. The Rosethorn Family Renewal Foundation was built to protect families in crisis, children who need therapy, mothers who need housing, parents who need a chance to breathe again. It was never created to repair anyone's public image. It was never created to become a trophy for corporate approval. Kellen tried to interrupt. "Mireya, this is not the place." She turned to him. "You made it the place when you brought my marriage, my name, and my work into this room." His mouth closed. Mireya faced the board again. "I did not come here to destroy him. I came here to protect what he tried to take from people who need it." Adeline opened the folder. The legal advisor began reading. Kellen's control slipped in front of everyone. The documents moved from hand to hand with quiet urgency. Adeline read the first page twice. The legal advisor leaned toward another committee member and pointed to the dates. A reporter near the back kept recording. Investors who had praised Kellen minutes earlier now watched him with guarded eyes. Corvin Say no longer looked comfortable. The folder showed more than one angry email. It showed a pattern: calendar changes, excluded meetings, draft language about Mireya's emotional fitness, notes about public perception, a proposed leadership shift that would turn Mireya from founder into decoration. Kellen tried to recover. "This has been taken out of context," he said. Alara answered before Mireya could. "No, it has been placed in order." That sentence landed cleanly. Mireya did not smile. This was not victory to her. It was grief with evidence. It was the death of a marriage in front of people who had once applauded its image. Still, beneath the pain, there was peace. Kellen could no longer make her silence look like weakness. He could no longer use Alara's name as a shadow over her. He could no longer steal the foundation while pretending to protect it. Adeline closed the folder. "The restructuring vote is suspended pending review," she said. A murmur moved across the room. Kellen looked at Mireya, and for one brief moment, the pride in his face cracked. Maybe he saw the woman he had lost. Maybe he saw the damage he had caused. Maybe he only saw power moving out of his reach. Mireya did not wait to find out. She gathered her things and turned away from him. If you believe quiet patience should never be mistaken for weakness, like this video, and share it with someone who needs this reminder. Comment below and tell me, would you have stayed calm like Mireya or exposed him sooner? The room had expected Mireya to break. Instead, Kellen lost the room. Mireya did not leave the penthouse in anger. She left with quiet hands, steady breath, and a heart that felt older than it had that morning. The elevator doors opened into the home she had once believed would hold her whole future. The marble entryway gleamed. The tall windows framed the city. The living room still carried the careful beauty of a marriage built for public admiration. Fresh flowers sat on the center table, ordered by staff, not by love. A silver frame held a photograph of Kellen kissing her temple at a charity dinner. In that photograph, he looked devoted. She remembered feeling safe that night. Now the room felt like a place where someone else had lived. Mireya walked past the grand staircase and entered the bedroom. She did not open every closet. She did not take every dress. She packed what mattered. Clothes that felt like herself, her mother's music charm, a few books with folded pages, foundation files she had brought home, letters from families whose lives had been changed by her work. Her wedding ring still rested beneath her blouse on its chain. She touched it once, not with longing, but with respect for the version of herself who had believed in the promise. By sunset, a car waited downstairs. Kellen did not come home. Part of her was grateful. Another part ached at how easy absence had become for him. As the car pulled away from the tower, Mireya looked up at the penthouse windows one last time. She was not leaving empty. She was leaving with her name, her purpose, and the truth Kellen failed to bury. The Brooklyn townhouse was nothing like the penthouse. It had warm lights, narrow stairs, simple floors, and windows that opened toward a quiet tree-lined street. The space was smaller, but it did not feel cold. It did not demand performance. It did not ask Mireya to smile for guests, donors, cameras, or anyone watching from a distance. It only asked her to breathe. That first night, unopened boxes lined the walls. A folded blanket sat on the floor. Her clothes remained in suitcases. The kitchen held paper cups, tea bags, and one small lamp she had carried from the foundation office because its light made any room feel less empty. Mireya sat on the floor with her back against the sofa. For hours she had been strong. She had faced the board. She had protected the foundation. She had walked out of a tower where her husband tried to turn humiliation into strategy. She had signed temporary housing papers. She had answered calls from Vivian. She had assured foundation staff that their work would continue. But strength had a limit. A knock came at the door. Mireya opened it to find Alara standing there with takeout bags, bottled water, and a look that asked for nothing. "I brought dinner," Alara said. "You do not have to talk." That almost broke Mireya before she stepped aside. They sat on the floor together, eating from containers balanced on cardboard lids. For a long while, no one spoke. Alara did not fill the silence with advice. She did not ask for details. She did not turn Mireya's pain into questions. That kindness reached Mireya more deeply than speech. At last, Mireya set her food down, covered her face with one hand, and cried. The tears did not come like defeat. They came like truth, finally finding space. Mireya cried for the younger Kellen first, the man who had stood near the water at sunrise, with fear in his voice and hope in his hands, the man who told her he wanted to learn gentleness, the man who once listened when she spoke, who once sent her speeches with notes asking where he sounded false, who once rested his head against her shoulder after days that almost crushed him. She cried because that man had felt real. Maybe he had been real. Maybe that was what hurt most. Alara sat beside her and handed her a napkin without making the moment feel small. Mireya wiped her face and stared at the boxes across the room. "I do not miss what he became," she said softly. Alara waited. "I miss who I believed he could still be." The words left Mireya with a quiet ache. She had carried that hope longer than she admitted. Each missed dinner, each cold reply, each flower arrangement sent in place of presents, she had told herself that the man she loved was still somewhere beneath the pride. She had believed stress changed him. She had believed success confused him. She had believed patience might lead him back. But hope can become a room with no door when it asks one person to wait while the other keeps walking away. Mireya drew in a slow breath. "I kept loving the promise," she said, "even after the man stopped honoring it." Alara looked at her with gentle honesty. "That is why this hurts. You are grieving someone who once gave you reason to believe." Mireya nodded. For the first time, she let herself admit that leaving him did not mean she had never loved him. It meant love alone was no longer enough. Alara understood grief better than she often showed. She knew people expected pain to become simple once the truth appeared. They thought proof made leaving easy. They thought betrayal killed love in one clean moment. But Alara knew the heart did not work that way. A person could know the truth and still ache for the memory. So she chose her words with care. "Mireya," she said, "missing the past is different from returning to pain." Mireya looked at her. Alara continued, "You are allowed to miss the good parts, the early mornings, the soft moments, the man who made promises before power changed how he saw himself. Missing that does not mean you made the wrong choice today." Mireya lowered her eyes. "I keep wondering where I failed him." "You did not fail him," Alara said. "You loved him, you corrected him, you stood beside him. You protected his name longer than he protected your heart." The room grew quiet again. Outside, a car passed slowly along the street. The townhouse creaked softly, settling around them like a new beginning that did not yet know its own shape. Mireya pressed a hand to the chain beneath her blouse. "He used to say I made him feel safe," she whispered. Alara's voice softened. "Safety should never be one-sided." That sentence stayed in the room. Mireya had given Kellen a place to be human, but he had turned her patience into permission. She had helped him heal, but he had used his power to make her smaller. She had protected the foundation, their marriage, and his image, while he prepared to sacrifice her dignity for control. Mireya let the truth settle. She could honor what had once been good without returning to what had become harmful. That was the first real boundary of her new life. The first box Mireya opened was not filled with clothes. It held letters. Some were from mothers who had received emergency housing support. Some came from children who drew uneven hearts and bright doors with crayons. Some were from teachers, counselors, and program directors who wrote updates after grants changed a family's path. Mireya had packed them herself because she needed proof that her life was larger than her marriage. She sat cross-legged on the floor and lifted the letters one by one. A mother wrote that she had been able to take her daughter to school from a safe address for the first time in months. A counselor wrote about a child who had started speaking again after therapy. A young woman wrote that the Foundation's training program helped her get her first office job. Mireya read until her breathing became steady. Alara watched her, saying nothing. The letters reminded Mireya that Kellen had tried to take more than a title. He had tried to take the work that carried her heart into the world, but he had failed. The Foundation still stood. The family still mattered. The mission still belonged to truth, not branding. Mireya reached into another box and pulled out a framed photograph of her parents, her mother's smile, her father's steady eyes. She placed the frame on the small mantel. Next, she unpacked her tea kettle, then 2 mugs, then 1 worn book from Savannah. Each item made the townhouse feel less temporary. By midnight, only 3 boxes had been opened, but Mireya looked around and felt a quiet shift. Rebuilding did not need to begin loudly. Sometimes it began with 1 letter, 1 mug, 1 breath, and 1 decision not to go back. While Mireya opened boxes in Brooklyn, Kellen remained inside the storm he had created. The shareholder meeting did not stay contained. Reporters had seen too much. Board members had received copies of the documents. Investors had watched his confession collapse into exposure. By evening, business outlets were questioning his judgment, his leadership, and the future of Rosethorn Global's foundation operations. Kellen's phone did not stop ringing. Some calls came from legal advisors, some came from board members demanding answers, some came from investors who spoke in calm voices, which made their concern more dangerous. Adeline Marrow requested a formal review. The foundation committee suspended every restructuring discussion. Corvin Say, once so close to Kellen's plan, suddenly became harder to reach. That angered Kellen more than he wanted to admit. People who had praised him that morning now measured their distance by nightfall. Inside his office, Kellen stood before the windows with his jacket removed and his tie loosened. The city below looked the same, but nothing around him felt secure. His perfect image had cracked in public, not because Mireya attacked him, but because she told the truth with evidence strong enough to stand without shouting. That was what he could not escape. He had prepared for tears. He had prepared for anger. He had prepared for a wife too hurt to defend herself. He had not prepared for calm. He replayed the moment Alara walked past him, the folder landing on the table, Mireya's voice saying, "This is my life's work." The board's silence, the reporter's recording, the way every eye shifted from admiration to doubt. For the first time in years, Kellen Rosethorn had lost control of a room. Worse, he had lost the woman who once helped him survive every room before that. Mireya returned to the foundation before the public expected her to. Some thought she would hide after the shareholder meeting. Others assumed she would take weeks away to recover from the scandal. But Mireya knew the foundation did not pause because her heart was hurting. Families still needed housing. Children still needed therapy. Mothers still needed support. Young women still needed someone to tell them their lives were not finished because one season had wounded them. So she entered the office early on a Monday morning. The staff grew quiet when they saw her, not from fear, from respect. They had watched the headlines. They had heard what Kellen tried to do. They knew she had defended more than her position. She had defended the work they all believed in. Mireya stood before them with tired eyes, but steady grace. "We continue," she said. "We do not let anyone turn our purpose into a scandal." That became her new beginning. She expanded child therapy grants. She opened a support branch for mothers returning to work. She created leadership training for young women who had been taught to stay small. Alara joined the foundation as operations director, no longer tied to Kellen's office. Together, they rebuilt with focus. Mireya had lost a marriage, but she had not lost herself. Months passed before Kellen asked to see her. His message was short. No command, no pride, no attempt to sound like the man who once controlled every room he entered. "Mireya, I would like one private meeting. Only if you agree." She read it twice. There was no rush in her reply because there was no fear left in her. The old Mireya would have worried about his tone, his mood, his meaning. This Mireya took time, prayed quietly in her own way, spoke with Vivian about legal boundaries, and agreed to meet in a garden behind a quiet restaurant. Kellen arrived first. He looked different, less polished, thinner. His suit was still expensive, but it no longer hid the strain in his face. The man who had once stood before investors with cruel confidence now looked like someone who had finally spent time alone with his own choices. Mireya sat across from him. For a moment, neither spoke. Kellen lowered his eyes. "I'm sorry," he said. The words were simple, but they came without performance. "I used control because I thought it would protect me. I used it against you. I used Alara. I tried to take the foundation because I wanted power over the one thing you still held without me." Mireya listened. This time, his regret was real. But regret was not the same as repair. Kellen looked at Mireya with hope he tried to hide. "I lost myself," he said. Mireya folded her hands in her lap. "No, Kellen. You chose yourself too many times until everyone else disappeared." The words hurt him. She saw that. But she did not soften them with a lie. He looked away. "I thought if I controlled everything, nothing would touch me." "You touched everyone else first," she said. "That is what control does when love is no longer guiding it." For the first time, Kellen had no answer ready. Mireya looked at the man she had once loved with her whole heart. She saw his shame. She saw the young man who had asked to learn gentleness. She saw the husband who forgot that promise. Her heart felt tender, but tenderness no longer made her weak. "I forgive you," she said. Hope rose in his eyes. "But forgiveness does not return me to a place where I had to shrink to be loved." Kellen's face fell. Mireia continued, "I forgive you because I refuse to carry your choices forever. But I will not give my peace back to the man who once treated it like something he owned." That was the end. No shouting, no revenge. Only truth. She walked away lighter than she arrived. Mireia met Kalen Thorne at a housing development meeting in Chicago. He was wealthy, but wealth was not the first thing people noticed about him. He did not enter the room with noise. He did not interrupt staff. He did not ask where his name would appear on the building plaque. He sat with a notebook open and asked the housing coordinators what families needed most. Mireia noticed that. After the meeting, they walked through the unfinished building with the project team. Dust covered the floor. Workers moved through open rooms. On a temporary board near the entrance, children had drawn their dream homes with crayons. One drawing showed a yellow door, 2 windows, and a small garden. Kalen stopped in front of it. "This is the real project," he said. Mireia looked at him. "The building?" He shook his head. "The feeling of safety." For the first time in a long while, Mireia smiled without forcing it. Kalen did not ask about her scandal. He did not pretend not to know either. He treated her like a woman with a present, not a headline with a past. That mattered. When he later offered to fund part of the housing program, he asked for strong reporting, not public praise. Mireia respected him before she trusted him. Trust would take longer. Kalen seemed willing to wait. Kalen never chased Mireia's pain. He respected the space around it. Their closeness grew through small, steady acts. He sent books with notes in the margins, never grand declarations. He remembered her tea. He checked whether she had eaten after long foundation events. When she needed silence, he gave her silence without punishing her for it. That was new. One evening after a donor dinner, rain started falling before Mireia reached her car. She stood under the awning, searching her bag for her phone. Kalen stepped beside her with an umbrella. "Would you like company?" he asked. Not, "I will take you." Not, "You need me." A choice. Mireia looked at the umbrella, then at him. Something in that small question touched a place in her heart Kalen had wounded often. Kalen did not assume ownership over her comfort. He offered presence and left the decision in her hands. She stepped beneath the umbrella. They walked slowly through the rain. Their shoulders touched once. Neither forced the moment into something larger. That was why it felt safe. Weeks later, inside the new renewal center, Kalen brushed his hand near hers. He paused before touching her. Mireia leaned into his palm. "I am still learning how to trust peace," she whispered. Kalen answered, "Then we move at the speed of trust." The Mireia Rosethorn Center for Family Renewal opened on a bright morning filled with families, staff, laughter, and quiet tears. Children ran through clean halls lined with books and drawings. Mothers filled out support forms with counselors beside them. Young women toured the training rooms where they would learn skills, confidence, and leadership. Alara stood near the entrance, directing staff with calm pride. Mireia gave a short speech. She did not mention Kellen. She did not mention the boardroom. She spoke about second beginnings, safe rooms, honest help, and the courage it takes to start again. After the ceremony, she stepped into the small garden behind the center. The noise faded behind her. Kalen found her there, standing near a bench with her hands folded. "You did it," he said. Mireia looked back at the building. "I survived it first." "And turned survival into shelter," he said. Her eyes filled. Kalen reached into his coat and brought out a small velvet box. He did not kneel before a crowd. He did not turn her healing into a public show. "I am not asking for an answer this second," he said. "I am asking for permission to hope with you." Inside was a simple ring with a blue stone, the same shade as Alara's folder. Mireia smiled through tears. "You remembered," Kalen answered. "I pay attention." That was why she said yes. Alara Wren was never the secret Kellen wanted the world to believe she was. She was the witness. She saw the meetings he hid behind polished words. She saw the emails, the legal notes, the quiet attempts to make Mireia look unfit. She saw how a man with power tried to turn gossip into a weapon. But Alara did not let fear rule her. She chose the truth over comfort, because one honest witness, standing at the right moment, changed the whole room. Kellen believed Alara would help him shame his wife. He thought her position made her easy to control. He thought silence meant loyalty. He thought a secretary would protect her job before protecting the truth. He was wrong. Alara had seen Mireia's kindness long before the scandal. Her brother had received help from the foundation. Her family had felt the impact of Mireia's work. So when Kellen tried to use Alara as a weapon, she became the shield. She did not choose power. She chose what was right. Mireia lost a marriage, but she did not lose her name. She lost the man she once loved, but she did not lose her purpose. She walked away from the penthouse, the public image, the false comfort, and the painful silence that had held her down for too long. Kellen thought humiliation would break her. Instead, it freed her. She protected the foundation. She protected the families. She protected the woman she had worked so hard to become. Sometimes walking away is not failure. Sometimes it is self-respect finally speaking. Never mistake quiet love for weakness. Mireia loved deeply, but she was not blind. She forgave, but she did not surrender her dignity. She stayed calm, but her calm was not fear. It was strength with discipline. Some people think a gentle heart means an easy target. They learn too late that patience has limits. Mireia did not need to shout to prove her pain was real. She did not need revenge to prove she had been wronged. Her truth stood on its own. And that was enough. A person who loves you will not use your pain as strategy. They will not study your weakness so they can win an argument. They will not shame you in public to protect their pride. They will not make you beg for respect while calling it loyalty. Kellen wanted control. Kellen gave Mireia choice. That was the difference. Real love gives peace. Real love gives room to heal. Real love protects your voice, even when the truth is hard to hear. Mireia did not find love again because she was lucky. She found it because she stopped accepting less. Now, tell me in the comment section, would you forgive Kellen after everything he did? Would you trust Alara if you were Mireia? And do you believe Mireia made the right choice by walking away instead of returning to a marriage where she had to shrink? If this story touched your heart, please like this video, share it with someone who needs this reminder, and subscribe to Love Tales with Mr. Easton for more emotional stories filled with love, betrayal, dignity, healing, and life lessons. Remember this, the right person will never make you lose yourself to keep them.
Thank you for listening, and thank you for choosing stories that ask more of you. The next story will be waiting.